that, we're going to start measuring our dry ingredients. The first thing we're going to measure is 4 cups of flour. This is all-purpose flour, and I like to use bleach flour because unbleached flour sometimes gets mealworms in it, so it's better if you just buy the bleached flour. When you're measuring flour, you want to dip your cup into the bag and then level it off with a butter knife so you get exactly 1 cup. And last cup. Make sure when you're scooping your flour that you don't want to pack it in there. Okay, now that we have our flour, the next thing we're going to measure is baking powder. We're going to actually measure 2 teaspoons of this. Now you measure this the same way that you would measure the flour. Dip the spoon in and level it off with a butter knife. Okay, we're also going to measure 2 teaspoons of baking soda. Again, just measure this the same way. Level it off. If there are clumps in here, just try to break them up and then level it off. Okay, now that we have the baking soda done, we're going to measure 1 teaspoon of salt. Now that we're done putting all the dry ingredients in, we're going to start whisking it. Now actually, a lot of recipes say to sift the dry ingredients together, but I learned this from an episode from Martha Stewart, that if you whisk it, it's basically the same thing as sifting it, as long as you don't have really hard chunks of anything in there. The next thing we're going to do is cream our butter and our sugar together. So I'm using 2 sticks of softened unsalted butter, and you really want to soften this overnight. But let's say you forget, which I have done many times. If you put your sticks of butter in a Ziploc and then put it in a pot of room temperature water, it should soften quicker. There. 2 sticks of butter. And now we're going to measure our sugar. We're going to use 2 2/3 of a cup. Now we do the same thing we did with the flour. Dip it in and then level it off. 1 cup. Okay, now that we have all our butter and sugar together, we're going to mix it with an electric mixer. Okay, now that we have our butter and sugar mix, we're going to measure 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract and pour it into the butter and sugar mixture. Okay, now we're going to mix this again. Okay, now we're going to crack 4 eggs into this mixture and then mix it again. What I like to do is use the sharp edge of a butter knife and crack the egg so that it has a nice clean edge to break. beat the eggs into the butter mixture. And now that we're done mixing that, we're going to measure 2 cups of buttermilk. Okay, now that I've measured my first cup of buttermilk, we're going to start alternating between the dry and the wet ingredients. So we're going to put 1/3 of the dry ingredients in first. It doesn't have to be that exact, just eyeball it. Okay. Now we're going to mix this. Okay, now that I mixed in 1/3 of the dry ingredients, I'm going to pour in my first cup of buttermilk. If you noticed in the close-up shot, I measured the buttermilk a little above the 1 cup line, like I did in my last video, because as you can see, there's still residual buttermilk left in the cup. Okay, so now we're going to mix this. Now I'm going to add in my second third of dry ingredients. Okay, now that's mixed in, I'm going to measure my second cup of buttermilk. Now we're going to mix in the rest of the buttermilk. Okay, now we're going to put in the remainder of our dry ingredients. Okay, after you're done mixing everything in, be sure to scrape down your sides of your bowl to make sure everything gets evenly incorporated. Okay, so I scrape down the bowl. And now I'm just going to mix it again. Okay, now that we're done with the batter, I'm going to go get the muffin pans. Okay, so I have 2 muffin pans with paper liners in them. These are actually the separators in between the aluminum foil liners that I bought, but these can work as well. If you don't want to buy paper liners, you can just butter and flour the inside of the baking pan and it'll come out fine, but this is easier to clean up. So I'm going to use this large ice cream scoop to make sure that the batter is evenly distributed. If you don't have this, then just try eyeball to make sure that most of the cups have about the same amount of batter using spoons. Okay. I'm going to take 1 scoop and just pour it in. Okay, just make sure they're pretty even, which they are. So now, there's the batter here. We're going to put some raspberries and sugar on top. We're also going to put 6 tablespoons of sugar, but we're not going to use that for only these muffins because 6 tablespoons is for all the batter. Okay, so you just take your raspberries, put them in your cupcakes. Okay, now that I have 3 raspberries in each cupcake, we're going to start sprinkling the sugar on top. So I'm using 6 tablespoons. But since a tablespoon is kind of large and we have a small cupcake, to make it easier, I'm going to use the teaspoons. And there are 3 teaspoons and 1 tablespoon, so I'm actually using 18 teaspoons. Okay, now that we've gotten the raspberries and the sugar on, it's time to put these in the oven. I bake these at 350 degrees for about 15 minutes, and at around 8 minutes, turn the pan 180 degrees so that both sides bake evenly. If you have a convection oven though, you don't need to do this. Okay, let's see how one turned out. And that's how you make raspberry buttermilk muffins.